Can you keep a secret?
Changing hearts and minds.
Changing hearts and minds.
Welcome to Change Your POV podcast. You're listening to Changing Hearts and Minds, a show about reviving the warrior spirit and remembering the past to improve our future. I'm your host, Jeff Adamick. Let's get this party started.
Ladies and gentlemen, am I totally screwed or what? You're funny.
I want to discuss all this behavior.
Let me out of here!
Hey guys, this is Jeff and welcome to Changing Hearts and Minds. Today's guest is really special because, well, I'll go into how me and Duane got to know each other, but I've got Duane France from Headspace and Timing, which is one of our other shows here on the network. Duane, welcome to Changing Hearts and Minds.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate you having me.
Duane, real quick, before I go into how you and I know each other separate and outside of the podcast world, why don't you tell my listeners, tell them a little bit about yourself so that they can kind of get an idea who you are.
I am a retired Army non-commissioned officer. I retired out of the Army back in 2014 after 22 years. I was in the logistics field. I spent most of my career with light infantry support. I spent 3 years in the 82nd. Did some time on recruiting, spent a lot of time here at Carson. Once I retired, I got out and got my master's degree and am working as a mental health counselor for veterans, regularly for veterans at this point, sometimes with veterans and their spouses. But I'm focusing on veteran mental health, which is I do as the host of Headspace and Timing, one of the Change Your POV podcast network shows.
Thank you, Duane. Now that you guys have a better understanding of that, let me take a moment to explain to you. I'm going to tell you a story, kind of give you a hint about what we're talking about today. We're not going to talk about veteran PTSD or anything. That's Duane's show. I would never take Duane's show away from him. If you want to hear us talk about PTSD, you can go to Duane's show, and he may or may not have an episode on it. So come down to my level and close your eyes if you're at home, and I want you to envision a guy sitting in a suit behind a desk who's running a office. He's in charge of the office. Everyone likes him. He's got a lot of money, but he's not a douchebag. He's a pretty good guy. Everyone likes him. You know, he owns the business. His name is on the building. And then at night, he goes home and he goes into a cave under his house and he puts on a friggin' black suit and goes out and kicks the hell out of clowns and people dressed up like fat penguins. I am talking about Jeff Adamick. No, I'm kidding, guys. I'm talking about Bruce Wayne and Batman. And that brings me to what we're going to talk about today. The multiple personalities that exist in combat deployed soldiers, sailors, Marines. It goes across the board. Now, I can already feel the people getting ready to shut it off. Don't shut it off yet, because if you don't think we have split personalities, you will by the end. Because I guarantee you that your wife and kids have never seen the business end of you, but the guys who've been deployed have, and it's not the same person. Duane, what do you think? Think I'm going down the right road with that, or what?
No, absolutely. I mean, there's the idea of split personalities in the clinical sense, and we're not talking about dissociative identity disorder, which is a literal split personality in the psychological sense. We're just talking about different roles that we reveal to each other or to different people at different times. We talked about this, the difference between Bruce Wayne and Batman and which is the real individual, but it's different parts for the different jobs and the different environments that we're in. And I do also believe that there are times when we do have different images, different costumes, perhaps different faces that we present to different people.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. And my idea for this episode comes from the fact that I was actually told by a guy I work with that he had issues at times recognizing which Jeff I was. Was I the Jeff that he'd seen on deployment, or was I the guy who came back home and spent all his time with his family, coached baseball, very good with kids? It's two different people, and we'll use the Batman Bruce Wayne reference a lot because it's an easy reference that everyone knows, and people who aren't military can still understand it. But that is a good question. It's a question that's been brought up over time, and this isn't about Batman. This is about what we're talking about. Is which one is the real one, and which one is the split personality, if you will, and not like not dissociative disorder, but the different masks we wear, the different roles we play in life. And I think both of them need each other. And I think that the same applies with soldiers, with people who have to do things that are in essence against their moral character. And that doesn't mean right and wrong, but the military is some of the most honest to God good people I've ever met. God-fearing religious people, and me personally, I'm not super religious. I do go to church. I'm not super, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with religion. But I do know that if a person is really religious, turns around and all of a sudden goes on a shooting spree and kills a bunch of people, that's different than the person that they are in church. And maybe it's the best way to use an example of where in real life is someone like John Wayne Gacy, which I hate to associate a serial killer with this, but I think that that's a good example of two different people that exist in the same one, and not realizing how to use those different aspects of our personalities at different times.
No, I think that's exactly right as far as you're talking about different areas and different times, what we're using to different people. You think that we were who we were when we came in the military, whether we joined when we were 18, 17, 19, that teenage years, or maybe we were somebody who, we always had that 32-year-old E3 or E4, right, that joined the military after having an entirely different life. But we are a different individual, obviously, before we come in, and then our identities are changed in basic training. We become we're not even called by our first name. So the name that we're known by for the most of our lives, that name is taken away from us. If we're lucky or not lucky, I recall when I first went to basic training, we all gave each other nicknames, right? We all tried to figure out, who's the Superman, who's Tackleberry, or whatever it is, right? And so we figure out this kind of different identity, and then of course through basic military training, we're taught different values, and we merge into this identity of soldier. And so really just coming in the military is changes our identity, and changes kind of who we are and what we think. Whatever our reasons for joining have kind of gone out the window, and we become this different individual. And then as we progress through the military, we take on different identities based on duty position, rank, location, even, or the choices we make. Yeah,
I 100% agree with you. And guys, just so we're clear before I start getting the hate mail from some of you people, we're not saying, and it is a form of brainwashing if you want to say it that, but we're not saying the military brainwashes you. The process that they go through in basic training is necessary to be able to get you to focus on what your task is. There's a reason why privates are privates and sergeants are sergeants, and why in training yelling is happening, because in the battlefield, in a life and death situation, I do not have time to explain to you why. I only have time to get you to act. And so therefore, critical thinking is almost excluded from the process of a private. Thinking on your own, excluded. Here's the answer. When you don't know what the answer is, the sergeant will tell you. And the sergeant doesn't know, the platoon sergeant will tell him. And when the platoon sergeant doesn't know, he'll skip over the lieutenant and go to the captain, because no one listens to a lieutenant. So there's a hierarchy and an archetype, if you will, of our roles that we play. And the military designs basic training not just to get you to learn about being a soldier and get you in shape, but to make sure that you are mentally at the point to fill the role that you have, so that you can be successful in the military. Because when the shit goes down, if you're anything else, you're either a hero or a friggin' detriment to the unit. And that's the honest God truth. The difference between being a hero and being an asshole is a decision you make, or a split in the string theory time. You want a step right or left can be the difference between you being some guy who runs into battle to save someone's life, or you being the asshole who runs off, gets shot in the leg, and now 10 people got to come find you, and they all get killed. So, each one of those things all come from the same place, but that's because you ran off on your own. They need to exterminate that, so they create you into this machine for a purpose. And now, what is the real cause of why we're talking about this? because I need people, or I want people to understand and that these different personalities you have are not happening because you choose to turn them on and off. They happen subconsciously when you get put into situations where you know what works. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have those personality switches. But what it does mean is when you identify that, you can probably use some of those personality traits to your advantage outside of being in combat. And what I mean is I think that you should be able to use drive and aggression and critical thinking and combat type thinking, to help you out as a leader in a business world. Only in moments of crisis, because that's when it works. But you have to understand to only draw on the mental aspect of it, not draw on the physical aspect, because you don't want to run across a boardroom table and friggin' drop kick a guy because he said something. But you may need to utilize tact, direct, and action to handle a crisis situation that's happening inside of a workplace.
Well, yeah, absolutely. You brought up a great point, Jeff, in that you said that it takes a certain level of awareness. Now, you had mentioned at the beginning of that you're not talking about brainwashing, where maybe on a certain level we are. You and I have both gone through the greatest Pavlovian experiment that I know of, and it's called airborne school. The whole basis of airborne school is to get you to do something when that little green light goes on, and to do something that's against our natural instincts, which is to jump out. I don't want to say a perfectly good airplane, but they were airplanes and they were still flying in the air. And so the whole idea of airborne school was, okay, we're going to jump off of little walls and we're going to get your brain and your body used to doing this. And you're just going to jump over and over and over again. Then you take it to the next level and you jump out of the towers and you ride the towers up and down. Again, getting your mind habituated to the point where the prefrontal lobe does not override I'm not going to jump out of this airplane, and getting to the point that when the green light goes on, you jump out. And that's what you're talking about as far as those split-second decisions. The Army does a very great job. The military does a great job of training us to be effective combat-ready individuals. Then that awareness piece, you can't untrain something that's been trained, but you can take it to the next level. I know why I was doing that, and I can, like you said, use that in my post-military career, which is what we're talking about now.
Yeah, to a point. And just real quick experiment, jumpers hit it. Now, how many people listening to the episode at home immediately got into a tight body position with their hands over the edge and started counting to 4? That's the Pavlovian thing. They not only do they do what Duane says, but they're constantly yelling that, because what they need you to do is at the time of not knowing what to do, get into a tight body position. Count to 4. If it doesn't have anything happen, pull your reserve, so that when you have that crisis, that panic, your body has muscle memory built into it to react in a certain way that's going to save your life. And you're not aware of it. So what does that mean? That means that when you become aware of the fact that you have these different personalities, you have to be careful about drawing on them, because there are built-in responses that are related to these things. It's the Pavlovian response. If I hear a gunshot go off, I immediately turn with my hands up in front of me and face the direction of gunfire every single time. And what are the hands in front of me doing? They're simulating me holding my M4 and putting it up to a ready state. If my M4 never worked, I never even thought about it. My hand would immediately go to my secondary weapon system in transition. That happens over years and years of doing it over and over again. So muscle memory, building muscle memory, is in fact just another form of brainwashing your body into reacting to a stimulus without you having to consciously think about it. The danger, if I try to draw on something that's associated with something that I don't want to do, you got to be careful, because you may end up doing the other thing, and then you've got no excuse, because I just told you to make sure you're aware and to make sure you're good enough to be able to not do it. So if you're going to get combat focus, be prepared for you to start doing some weird stuff along with it until you be able to separate those things and weed out. And this is all after you get out, guys. We don't want you thinking that if you're in the military, you've got to know those things and keep those tasks separate. Keep those things separated. Your family does not need to see the business end of Joe Snuffy. You don't want to show them that, because that's not the person they know, and they shouldn't have to know that person. But you have to be aware that you're different.
And that's something that you bring up between Bruce Wayne and Batman, is that needing to understand which to be in which environment. the aggression. Honestly, when we were deployed, when I was a platoon sergeant running security escort patrols in Afghanistan, I wanted my Joes to be aggressive. I rewarded aggressiveness and anger, and hypervigilance and all of these different things. I didn't want them being concerned and caring. I told them, don't put pictures of mama in your helmet. Leave fob love at the home and at the fob, and don't bring that out here on patrol because I want your head in the game. In that environment, that was necessary for us to do the job that we needed to do. Then coming back home, we don't know how to switch that back around and turn that aggression off when we're standing behind the nice lady writing a check in the checkout line, because it's a different environment that we need to operate in. And if we're not aware of these kind of impacts, then we're going to be the wrong persona within the wrong environment, and that's trying to figure out which one is which.
Now, hypervigilance, it's a great word. I love it because it really does put a real name to the thing that happens when a loud noise happens in a room, and every single person in the room can tell who the combat vets are because they jump. It happens every single time. To this day, you could drop something loud, and even as deaf as I am, I will immediately get the hairs in the back of my neck up. I will jump, and I will immediately start looking around the room and identifying threats. And that's something that I have to be aware of.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That didn't happen a lot at first, and over time it built into something that's almost unextinctable in my body now. Yeah.
I was, this was probably a couple months ago, me and my teenage son, we were in the kitchen. I cook on the weekends, and so I was at the stove. There was some cookie sheets, out on the counter, and the boy opens the cabinet, and a plastic cup drops and crashes on the cookie sheet. And of course what I do is I jump 3 feet to the left and freaking put my arms up. And my son's just sitting there looking at me. And I said, "Hey, what do you want, kid? Combat vet. It's part of who we are, And my wife's like, "What happened?" And my son was like, "Dad jumped." And I'm like, what do you, of course I did, and I laughed it off and things like that. But we recognize that that's the instinct. What we do after the instinct is key. If I would have allowed it to spiral me into, John Rambo kind of a flashback and really, I was aware of what it was immediately. I, grounded myself in the kitchen. I calmed myself down and I went back to doing what I was doing. It's part of who we are now.
We're talking about these things that come back with you, that are part of that other personality. But if you're aware that these things are going to happen, if you don't let it frighten you, if it's something it's going to get out of control if it happens long enough, and if it starts getting real bad, you're going to have a harder and harder time identifying when to shut it off, especially if you have PTSD. So real quick PTSD thing, if you're having it where it happens and then you're having a long, prolonged feeling of combat and threat and imminent danger, maybe go talk to somebody, and not a big deal. Go talk to someone and get it back under control. Once you get it back to the point where it's just a funny thing like it was at first, then you're good again. Then you understand, because it's going to be there for a long time, if not forever. And you have to be able to recognize what's happening so that you can get yourself to stop ramping up your cortisone injections into your brain and going into fight or flight or self-preservation mode, because then you start going muscle memory only. And if you're somebody that spent a lot of time in a combat job, muscle memory is all about eliminate threat, preserve life. And the preserving life is only your own. And so be advised of that. There is a moment where it's going to be too much. So if you have that going on, that's not funny. Go talk to someone so they can get it back to the point where it is funny, like Duane and I are saying, because I do the same thing all the time. Also, it applies when you're driving down the road after being in Iraq for a while, and you drive almost on the middle of the road and you avoid trash. Same idea. So, back to Batman. Do we have to have that personality? Do people generally have the ability to decide to just do what they have to do, or do we almost subconsciously need to have that switch that goes on and off? And why are we unaware of the difference until someone points it out to us?
Well, I think that if it's not, and Batman is a very black and white kind of extreme. He is one thing in one day, in the other thing at night. Whereas if it's not a switch, an up or down switch, it's probably more of a dimmer switch. We are we can be more of one thing at one time and less of another thing at another time, where it's not entirely either on or off, because nothing, there's no right angles in nature, and there's no true, extremes in nature. So it's a matter, again, of just figuring out where are we at. But it all has to do with adaptability to the environment. I recall when I came back from Iraq, my first tour, I was the operations sergeant, essentially, for a company. There was 140 people in the company. 4 people in the company were in charge. The commander and the first sergeant, of course, the company XO, and me. So I was the first sergeant's, right-hand man. So whatever Sergeant France said, 120 people in the company did it, with very few, if any, questioning. And not that it's a power trip, but that's what we did, right? That's how we operated in Iraq and got our mission done.
Right.
Well, then I came home on mid-tour leave, and I tried to bring that. Not even tried. I wasn't even aware, but I was bringing that same persona, that same guy who was in charge of everything, and tried to bring it back home. And I was getting frustrated because my wife wasn't listening to me. The kids, the cats weren't listening to me, right?
Yeah,
and I wanted to be like,
nothing respects me. Not even the lower life forms that respect me anymore.
Right. And I'm like, and I told my wife, and I was like, don't you realize who I am? And she was like, I don't give a crap, and it was because I didn't leave my boots at the door. I didn't hang up my cape whenever I came in. Because I didn't realize that I needed to shift. And in some instances, I couldn't have at that time, because then I had to go back to that deployed environment, and put back on the mantle of the bat, or put the cape back on.
The cowl,
to
the cowl
be
of
that.
the bat. Yeah, the cowl.
Yeah, and so we needed to. We have to be more flexible to be able to say, you know what, in this environment, I know that I'm not this, but in that environment, I know I'm that. And that's where, like you said, the awareness comes in, because it goes beyond the automatic learned responses, so that we're able to apply those learned responses appropriately in the different environment.
Now, to just go off track for a second, you said a phrase there. I don't know what it means. What is mid-tour leave? What is that? That's how I killed Duane France, everybody. He's choking on his own saliva because he just realized that he got a break in the middle of his deployments, and special operations really don't.
Yeah, of course, special operations only go for a couple months or 6 months at a time, whereas the rest of the Army goes for 15 months at a time, or 12 months at a time. So yeah, no,
touche, my friend. Well done. Well,
there's a difference between depth and volume, perhaps, but
there is, and just so you guys understand, we're not saying one is harder than the other, because at 15 months you have a certain amount of missions you do as a unit and have a broad scope. And special operations only do 6 months because their jobs are sometimes going every single day. That's why they only do 6 months. It has nothing to do with them being thrown a bone, or the fact that they do less because they think they're better than everyone else. It's the higher op tempo and the responsibility levels. And that's studies that have figured out that the stress levels for special operations stay at a level higher because of the constant work, rather than you have multiple platoons that are responsible for things on and off. A guy that's an 18 Charlie, senior Charlie at a fire base, 24 hours he's on duty as the 18 Charlie at a fire base. Every day he's leaving the wire. So that's why they do that. So that was a joke, because I never got a mid-tour leave. It would have been nice. But 3 months out, go Thailand, smoke some hashish, shoot up some heroin, sleep with hookers, just like they did in Vietnam. It would have worked out probably the same for the war, I think. But thank God they didn't do that. But back to it. The issue that I think we have when we don't identify and accept, and that's the thing, is accept the fact that we have we have multiple people in us. And I'm gonna give you, listen guys, I think you're smart enough out there to understand things at a different level, so I'm not going to dumb things down for you. If you don't know, go get the book The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell. But there's a phrase in it that's great. All the heroes and demons and hells and heavens are all within you. And it's a idea that every single you that you could possibly be, there is a potential for you to be if it is pushed the right way. And every single, this goes back to the whole, or is a serial killer born or is he created? It depends on who you talk to in the psychology field and people who study, criminal psychology. Most of those guys that have turned into serial killers have some kind of a traumatic childhood that built them into that thing. But there's some that don't have that, but so there's no knowing for sure. But because of that, we have to assume that anybody could be a hero, anyone could be a villain, anyone could be a lunatic, all if they're pressed the right way. Being aware that you have that ability as a person, as a human being, to be able to go back and forth, I think, and this is a question, I think helps you maybe prevent you from losing touch with which one you're being at certain times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the awareness is key to control. You can't control something. You can't change something until you have awareness of what it is and what it's about. The whole idea of nurture versus nature, and even in psychology, as a mental health professional, we've all, the industry and the profession agrees that the answer is yes, that both have. Yeah, I mean, it is because we do have genetic predisposition. Let's look at substance abuse, for example. We know that there is a genetic component that causes individuals to be predisposed to alcoholism. It's scientific fact. We know that it's there. We also know that there are individuals that are not genetically predisposed, but if they get into an environment in which alcohol is glorified or used frequently or things like that, then they also have the potential to become alcoholics and to abuse alcohol to a certain extent. However, if somebody who has the genetic predisposition is then put in that environment, the chances of them developing a substance use disorder is even greater. And so we do all have the potential for good and bad. We have the potential to be Batman or the Joker, but having the awareness of or developing the morality of establishing kind of boundaries in our life is what keeps us from going over the edge. Again, to look at Batman, the rule is Batman doesn't use guns. That's one thing that he always kind of said. He's not going to. He uses all kind of different weapons because that's a stopgap that he has imposed on himself. There's no rule, the vigilante handbook that says a guy that dresses up like a flying rodent can't use a gun, but he implied that right on himself, and that was because he wanted to put that stop measure in place to avoid him from going to a point that he didn't want to go to turn into the villain. So I think that awareness piece is huge.
It's also in the Batman mythology, they make reference to his decision to use the cowl as a on and off switch. Covering his face up is what turns him into the Batman, to the point where there was a time when in one comic book, it wasn't in a movie, I think it was in one of the comic books, that the mask gets pulled off and he immediately can't fight. He immediately goes back to being Bruce Wayne on the side with his parents watching them get shot because he couldn't be the thing that he had identified with, and he had just associated it and made it necessary for him to have that. And so that goes into some of the things that you may have to eliminate from your life if it's something that ends up identifying with a action or a reaction that you don't want. And alcohol is a good one. If you are one of these guys that drinks and gets belligerent and becomes a douchebag, and I refuse to believe you don't know who you are, because you know who you are, then you probably need to make a decision to tone it down or to shut it off. Because if you're a military guy, it will get to the point where there's an issue, because it's you're adding something into the mix that takes away your ability to make decisions or make correct decisions, and then you're adding reaction that has been built into you through exposure to real life stuff into it. And if you have an episode, you are going to be held accountable for what you're doing. And there's no talking your way out of it, because people just don't want to hear it when it comes to alcohol. You see the military all the time. Alcohol-related incidences, they do not go easy on people. And it's may or may not be a right thing. We may or may not be ignoring the fact that there may be underlying issues, but it's a fact. And until it's not a fact, we need to be able to self-regulate our exposure to things that are not good for us and take away our ability to be aware when we have both those personalities riding a razor line because we have another deployment coming up and we haven't had time to decompress. And that happens on both ends. You can't come home, like Duane said, and take over the house, because guess who else has been conditioning themselves to a certain way of living? The family. They've gotten used to mom being in charge. You have got to swallow your pride and let her stay that way and gently ease your way back into being the alpha, because the kids are not going to understand it, and you're going to piss her off, and she's well within her rights to be mad just as much as you are about them not listening.
Well, yeah, absolutely. My wife and I have talked about this, and she said that one of the times after the first deployments, when I came back home and I was disciplining the kids, they were toddlers at this point, that she said that she found herself thinking, who does this guy think he is coming in talking to my kids that way? And she had to kind of step back from that, where she didn't say it out loud, but she was like, wow, that was, she almost saw me as a stranger in our house threatening her kids when it had been, and that was after that first 15-month deployment. We had been nearly, a year and some change where she had been the one. And that's something that for us to be aware of the fact that, that those different identities shift. And going back and talking about the alcohol thing, and you talk about split personalities, the military has a split personality just when it comes to alcohol. So for on the one hand, they say, regulate your alcohol intake and of course, don't drink and drive, not just the legal aspect, but the danger aspect and everything else. And yet we have the grog bowl, yet we have the, kegers on the weekend and all of these different things and free flowing, the 19 years old in Germany and Korea, and you have, just a wide open range. And so the military itself sends different signals on what's approved and what's disapproved. Whereas we individuals have the ability to interpret those signals and choose the right way versus the wrong way.
Yeah, well put. Yeah, I know that's a lot to come at you guys, but I mean, this is the way things are. And I want to go into I don't want you, the listeners, feeling like you're getting a lecture. Honestly, we wanted to just talk about the two personality types, but this has gone into bringing up a very good point about how helpful it could be for people to be aware of it, because if we're aware and we accept it, then we can work our way to regulating it and using it to our advantage rather than letting it use us and take over. Because anger, lunacy, breaks in reality, not understanding, the right things to do. When you were someone that did the right things before, they can sneak up on you. And when they happen, and you can have somebody go into a manic episode that is, stimulated by something, and are they responsible for their actions? Yes, they are. But are they responsible at the moment it's happening? No, I don't think they are. They've have other things that have happened that have led them to have this break. That moment, they're not making a conscious decision, but nothing ever happens just out of the blue. So what we're trying to tell you guys is just make yourselves aware of these things as they go on. And it's not anything that makes you weak or makes you different. It's just, it makes you human. And ultimately, if you're not that, then what the hell are we talking? If you're not human, guys, come find me, because I'm bringing you to scientists and being the guy that found other life, because that's cool. But if you are human, then this is just the way things are. This is human nature. And you cannot beat nature. It wins every single time.
And I think that's, again, the awareness piece does allow the control. You mentioned earlier that you're the guy that coaches the soccer games. No,
it's baseball. Soccer is a sport for girls and Europeans.
Yeah. So, and I'm sure that has nothing against Europeans.
Hate mail coming.
So you're coaching t-ball, you're coaching baseball, and so you're that guy because you have awareness and you have the ability to control, and you're not immediately going to go into Action Jackson Jeff, unless Red Dawn comes and then you can, right? But having the awareness of, I am not in the environment in which I need to employ those set of skills. I'm in the environment I need to employ these set of skills. And having that awareness will allow you to shift between these two identities as you need to or as much as you want to.
So what is there any type of well-known or recommended ways that a person can start making themselves aware, or now that they are aware and they have these moments where they feel a guy coming on, that they can mitigate the use of the of Action Jackson as opposed to Yogi Berra?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with, and you'll hear a lot about mindfulness, especially in the mental health field. I talk about veterans, talk about mindfulness a lot with the veterans I work with. Mindfulness is being very aware of where I am in this current moment. I'm not thinking about what happened yesterday. I'm not thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm focusing on right now, what's happening currently, not just externally, but also internally, inside myself, being mindful of my current thoughts. Whenever I hear these thoughts kind of pop in, I recall when I came back from Afghanistan, after a certain point, probably the first couple months, all of our patrols occurred at night, and of course, I always cursed the S2. Because they always seem to come during full illume. And of course, we had the ability to travel in darkness, but when the full moon came up, then we absolutely knew that we were going to get hammered every single time, that they were going to test us, they were going to push us. And so we knew we were going to get attacked. So here I am after Afghanistan. I'm taking over a company, so I'm a first sergeant now, and I go to let the dogs out at 3:30 in the morning. And then the full moon comes up and I freeze. Literally in my kitchen, I freeze, and the thought comes in my head, crap, they're going to see us. Well,
Is that that's lunacy though, right? That's the full moon crap that goes on, or is that?
Well, but it was, and again, it's a response. It's a triggered response. It was a stimulus, the full moon, the bright light that's outside, that I was habituated. I was trained essentially in Afghanistan to say full moon means danger. That I learned that in a behavior sense. After a while, after a couple times of this, I then started to say, who's going to see me? The neighbors in my boxer shorts? Who gives a crap, right? And I was able to say, okay, I'm in Colorado. I'm in my kitchen. There's not danger here. I was able to ground myself the minute that thought would come in. Now it gets to the point where I'm aware of when the full moon cycle comes in, but it doesn't have the trigger for me as it once did. Definitely not the full body freeze emotion, heart rate rising, that kind of thing, because I'm able to say, you know what, I know I'm here, I know I'm safe. So different professionals will call it grounding. But it is mindfulness, and me being mindful, that my body just locked up and that my heart rate started to rise, me being mindful of the thought that came into my head, and me being mindful that, there's not danger here. And so really it's that kind of technique of constantly retelling yourself that, what, that guy that's on the roof over there is not a sniper, because there's not snipers typically found in Colorado Springs, Colorado. There may be in Fayetteville. I don't know.
If their snipers are not found, they shouldn't be seen. So let's go. Let's bring up something that's actually in the news recently, and actually, I think you have a blog posting from Headspace and Timing that actually talks about this. So in Times Square, I was in New York on Wednesday, and I was not in Times Square. I was on Fifth Avenue, and obviously, guys, when this gets released, this will be historical. This happened actually live. This is happening right now for us. But we had the Times Square guy who had taken his car and used it as the bumper car and used all the people on the sidewalk as the bumpers. A horrible video, and it ended up the guy was a Navy vet who had been kicked out. And I know it's a long stretch to think a guy who had gotten in and kicked out before the end of his first term that worked for the Navy is not a SEAL, has a killing mentality, but that heightened sense of purpose and awareness and the drive to be able to kill and not react to it, which the military does put into people. You need to, and go read the book On Killing as to how the military as a whole conditions you to kill. There's a correlation, and was it correlation and causation? Where
right.
if things are out of control and you can't decipher and you don't know what to do, you are going to put yourself into a condition where you may turn into the beast, or if you will. And this is a good example. This guy had some mental health issues, I think, really going back before he got in, because of what I've read. I know that they said he was on drugs and PCP, which PCP is a very, very bad drug to be on for someone who has the ability to switch on violence. I wouldn't do that because it's really, you just read about it. It really does some jacked up shit to people, including make you really strong, apparently. This guy turned and drove through for the sole purpose of just killing people on the sidewalk. And so now we're stuck with this thing with veterans again, and people aren't smart enough or not informed enough out there to realize what we are talking about now. He's a Navy vet who only served like a year or 2 years, something like that, and then got put out. So that doesn't apply when you look at it from an academic sense and a reality sense, but it still gets put out in the media that way. So we have to do everything we can to not fall into helping push this uninformed thought process or perpetuate the myth kind of thing. But go ahead and talk to us a little bit about, the military service and killing machines, and I will link that specific article, which is fantastic, to the show notes so that people can source it.
Yeah, that's something that's especially in psychology and in statistics and in experiments, they talk about correlation is not causation. Just because two things are linked in a positive or negative way doesn't mean that they cause each other. A good example that's often used is someone will say that increased ice cream sales result in more shark attacks. Those two things are positively correlated, not because the ice cream man is causing the sharks to come out, but the fact is people eat more ice cream in the summer and they go swimming more in the summer, and more swimming means more likelihood that shark attacks are going to occur. And so that's a good example of just because two things are correlated doesn't mean that they cause each other. Just because this individual happened to be in the military does not mean they're correlated. He killed someone with his car and he was in the military, but one didn't cause the other. The military didn't cause him to be a killer. I don't know about you, Jeff, but in that article, I think I said I've successfully refrained from becoming a cold-blooded serial killer. And the military did train me to shoot people. I have been able to control that. Just because I'm in a combat veteran doesn't mean that I'm John Rambo. And it doesn't automatically make that connection. This often happens whenever someone who is in the military causes it does something. That article was actually written during the summer of 2016. We had those two incidents, the one in Dallas, and then I think a week or 2 weeks later, the one in Baton Rouge, where two former service members opened up fire on different police officers, both in Dallas again and Baton Rouge. The same conversation I had with many of the veterans that I talked to when the service member went on a shooting spree in, I think it was Fort Lauderdale, about maybe 6 months ago. And so there's this idea that the assumption is as soon as they find out that it's a military service member, that it automatically means that they had the PTSD, and the PTSD caused them to do that.
While they're brainwashed by the military to become massive killing machines.
Charles Whitman went shooter in the tower, not to be disrespectful, but he went shooter in the tower back in the 60s. Yeah, he was a Marine, but it wasn't. But there are hundreds of Marines that have successfully refrained from becoming snipers in the intervening times. And so just because someone is a military service member doesn't mean that they become a killing machine. And that leads to really some of the unfair stereotypes that a lot of veterans face, whether we call it baby killer and the things that people were accused of in Vietnam, but just the assumption that we're villains, right? That we're the potential again, potential bomber, potential sniper. We're one broken pencil away from, going postal in our office. That leads to people thinking, well, I have to be careful around Jeff, or I have to be careful around Duane so that they don't have a meltdown, that they don't have an incident. And if they're going to have an incident, if somebody talks about that around me, it makes me more likely to have an incident.
Right.
And so it's those kind of things that if people act on known stereotypes, that they just assume, all Navy veterans are going to become knife wielding maniacs. And this is a challenge with a lot of veterans, and especially emerging into the workforce. what would it be like if someone were to say, oh, just because he grew up on the south side of Chicago, he's more likely to have killed someone? People don't make those kind of assumptions when they're looking to hire somebody. They do make those kinds of assumptions if someone came back from Afghanistan or Iraq. And that's really not fair.
It's not fair, and that is awesome that you said that, because I have a story about that applies. It was a few months ago. I was at work, and I was frustrated with a situation and dealing with an individual. And there's nothing wrong with this individual, and it was just a normal workday thing where there's frustration that occurs. And I was speaking to another person at work about the issue, and I was a little irritated by the situation. No different than I'd seen any other person at work be irritated about their situations. And someone was like, yeah, you just got to remember to kill them with kindness. And I'm like, if it was that easy. And I walked away and said nothing. Well, like a week later, I get told that after I walked away, they all went into a big, long conversation as to whether or not that was the right thing to say to me, because I had made the off-the-cuff comment is that if it was that easy, and then who I was were like, do you think he's going to go over there and try to kill him? Can he kill him with kindness? Is it a possible method of killing someone? And I mean, they were serious. They had this conversation for real. And I looked at them and I said, are you insane? Are you insane? Have you ever seen me be violent or lose my cool to the... I mean, I get frustrated like anyone else, and I'm aware that I have post-traumatic stress disorder, but I've never been violent. No one's ever seen me violent. Unless, if you see me violent, you probably didn't have anyone else to tell about afterwards, because it was during combat missions. So why would you make that assumption? And it's exactly what you're talking about. It's an assumption that because of what I did, because of the job I had, that I am John J. Rambo,
Sure.
waiting to just flip a switch on Brian Dennehy in some town and really go off the wall. First of all, I don't know how to fly a helicopter. There is no Colonel Troutman coming to get me. And second of all, I'm not so far gone. If I was that far gone, I wouldn't be functioning in a manner where I'd be able to have a job in a business environment. So people can't make that correlation that you have it under control, but so they assume, but then they feel guilty, and it's really weird.
But anticipate if that conversation would have happened if you had grown up in East St. Louis, or any one of our inner cities, or Detroit or something like that. If somebody would have said, "Oh, you think that would have been the right thing for him because he might have been in a gang while he was younger." I mean, and how insignificantly inappropriate that is. I mean,
Right.
that's. That is not, diversity and inclusion. That's, that's stereotyping. And so how inappropriate that conversation would have been with any other type of group, however people feel comfortable based on what they think they know about military veterans. And so, and that's a challenge that I think that a lot of veterans, imagine if, Superman, is now known, but known that he's Clark Kent and he's retired or whatever, but they say, he's gonna burn down our place with his heat vision or something like that. People are always on edge because they assume they know what this other identity is going to be, which then leads more to that split personality of I can't show who I am,
right?
Versus in this environment because people may misconstrue it. I don't know if you saw, and I did a post on this too. Have you seen the Metallica video for Confusion for the song that they wrote?
No, I haven't seen the video. I've heard the song.
And I'm definitely going to send it to you so you can link in the show notes, because the video itself, and it's a female veteran who's in the workforce, but she shifts back and forth between what she remembers from combat and where she's at in her work environment.
Is this literally like flashbacks, or is it just imagery they're using?
It's, I mean, and yes, it does kind of turn back into flashbacks, and it is art. It is sort of a representation of it. But it does go into, she's reminded, some guy's flying a drone around the office, and that triggers a memory of her and the Apache coming over or something, right?
Right.
And so, but it's a reality shifting thing. And again, not to say that this is what veterans are shifting back through, that I'm going to have flashbacks and start chucking chicken nuggets like they're grenades or anything. But it is
they will kill you. They will kill you just as quickly.
In the long run. but it's the idea of in this this video is a good way to show how sometimes you imagine that even though he is Bruce Wayne sitting there, making deals in the boardroom, the Batman's still going to creep in his mind,
So don't maniacally laugh at any time.
Yeah, don't start juggling knives or be careful with your umbrella if it's raining outside. But it's this, but then that individual has these two separate identities. As long as Bruce Wayne is aware of this is not the environment for Batman to come out, he's able to control it. And that goes back to the two different identities of combat veteran versus husband, father, American citizen.
Yeah, and it's a good lesson for everyone else out there that on your own, not by our poll, you have created these soldiers. We don't feel like heroes, guys. We feel like we're normal people. So when you create this thing that this guy's a hero when he deserves all this stuff, and then you drop those other things on, you have to realize the confusion that sets to people who are struggling to transition already, and what that could lead to. Because the worst thing in the world to add in to frustration is confusion. Because those two things together can equal something bad for that person in the long run. That we have a lot of different substance abuse and failure to launch things with people getting out of the military and they're losing all the success they had in the military is now gone. That all those things are being dealt with by veterans on their own. So having external pushes onto them about, I really respect your service, but I'm afraid of you in the workplace. It's a mixed message you're sending them. I mean, either don't hire them because you're afraid of them, or apply that respect and gratitude and give them a shot. If you've got to have somebody in your workplace that you need to worry about, then you probably don't need to have them in the workplace at all. But don't pretend like you're going to support them if that's going to be the way you're going to treat them. And that's my soapbox method for how the world can help not make veterans transition so hard.
And one of our fellow veterans, a veteran named Garrett Wilkerson, did a really great post on this. And it's called on being one of those weird veterans in the workplace. And Garrett graciously allowed me to post it over on Headspace and Timing. But it does talk about that. And Garrett experienced that specifically in his workforce or in his workplace. And the type of even dare say it, discrimination or judgment against what people think a veteran should be. As you said, Jeff, it leads to more complicated, more confusion on top of what the veteran's already going through. So yeah, it is a fine line. We're not saying that every veteran is the crazy combat vet stereotype that's going to hide under their desk at the sound of running feet. A lot of times veterans are going to be the ones that are, running towards versus running away from or things like that. But it really does take the community being aware of what the veteran has gone through and then just, being okay with it, dealing with it.
Right. And that doesn't mean treat us with kids' gloves because that's demeaning. And a veteran, no matter what their level of situation is, well, it doesn't tolerate with us very well because we have enough of our own issues that we deal with for you to treat us in a manner where we know we're being treated with kids' gloves. The bottom line is society as a whole in the United States needs to be aware of this split in the difference between who I am at work and who I am at home. And it's the same application because a person that works in business or at a police force or at a fire department or in finance, they're two different people also. This applies across the board to everybody. And if you really honestly take a look at yourself, note your reaction to things at work that happen at your home and see if they're the same. And I guarantee you're going to find that there's different reactions that are not conscious reactions. And that is exactly what that split personality is. Duane, great stuff, man. You gave me a lot of links that are going to be linked into the show notes for people to have for this. And at the end of the day, basically what we've said here is I'm Batman. And
you are in fact not Batman.
No?
You're
That's another show.
No.
You're going to have to convince me in another show I'm not Batman because I last night was in a cowl and my wife loves it. I don't know what she's like. Put that cowl on. That doesn't happen, guys. And for those of you who are listening to it who know my wife, do not tell her that I told you me and her do weird things at night with me dressed up like Batman. It doesn't happen. I dress up like Batman, but she ignores me. Thanks for coming on the show, Duane. I appreciate it. Why don't you take a moment to get all those listeners out there who now realize that you are worth listening to, and not just some weird guy that came on that I used to fill time, but you are a guy that's worth listening to, guys. And I vouch for Duane. He's insightful and he knows what he's talking about. So give him your places to find you at, and give yourself a plug, man. Plug yourself, bro.
Yeah, so it all started out. You can find a lot of what I'm doing over at veteranmentalhealth.com, all one word. That's where the Headspace and Timing blog lives. You can sign up for updates there. Usually we're up to 2 a week. We might go down to 1 a week depending on how things are going. But the Headspace and Timing blog has been going on for about a year. And we do have guest posts from individuals like Garrett and things like that. I am on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at The Counseling Vet. That's TH Counseling Vet. Really, you can't. I've got a big presence both in the real world and on the internet. So any LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, just look up my name. You can spell it correctly, Duane. Last name is France, and pretty much that's it. I also do work as a clinical mental health counselor for the Family Care Center here in Colorado Springs. Anybody looking to address some of this stuff in Colorado Springs, you can find us at fccsprings.com.
If you think you're Batman, do not show up at Duane's office dressed like Batman.
But you can. I mean, that's there's no judgment. Totally wherever you're at, and then we can explore why you think you might be. Yeah.
I hope when you go to work after this airs that there are like 30 batshit crazy mental institution escapees who show up dressed up like Batman. I don't know if there's a mental institution in Colorado, but it would be just hilarious if they all enforced that everyone in 10th group just shows up there just to mess with you.
Yeah, no, and I think that we do have some costume, but we also work with kids, so occasionally there are kids that show up dressed like Captain America and stuff like that. It's pretty cool.
We're not talking about Captain America. We're talking about Batman. That's a different episode. But
yeah.
Hey guys, in closing, remember that you are in complete control of your life and the way you see things. The only person that's going to stop you from being successful and being productive is you. Don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. Do not oppress yourself with your own fear and frustration. Free your mind and free the oppressed. And Peyton, you go ahead and take it away.
Change your POV and all of its shows can help and heal and even educate. We want you to help us help others. Visit our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/changeyourpov. Become a patron of our network and our mission.